We're continuing to follow breaking news at 5. The gunman who shot and killed 10 people at a Boulder King Soopers in 2021 will spend life in prison after a jury delivered their verdict guilty on all counts. We're now awaiting official sentencing. Thank you for joining us for an hour-long edition of Denver 7 News at 5. I'm Jessica Porter.
And I'm Jason Grenauer. The judge speaking inside that Boulder courtroom just ahead of that official sentence. So we want to listen in live right now.
Any further. However, Mr. Dougherty, I do have to ask you, because on the F2, what is the maximum on the F2, if you know?
The F2, the attempt to murder count, Your Honor, would be 48 years.
On each count?
Yes, sure.
Okay, and then what about on the F6? What's the maximum?
The F6, we were asking for 1 year on each one, Your Honor.
All right, and how about on that first degree assault?
The maximum on that is 32 years, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. I've done a lot of reading, but bear with me because this is important. As to count 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Nevin. It's a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Count 2, murder in the first degree as it relates to Kevin. Life sentence, no possibility of parole. Count 3, as it relates to Trelana. Life sentence without the possibility of parole. Forgot to add, these all run consecutive to each other. Count 4, murder in the first degree as it relates to Ricky. Life sentence, no possibility of parole, consecutive. Count 5, murder of Denny. Life sentence without the possibility of parole. Count 6, as to Lynn. Life sentence, consecutive without the possibility of parole. Count 7, as to Terry. Life sentence without the possibility of parole, consecutive. Count 8, murder in the first degree of Jody. Life sentence without the possibility of parole, consecutive. Count 9, murder in the first degree as to Suzanne. Life sentence without the possibility of parole, consecutive. And then count 10, as to Officer Talley. Life sentence without the possibility of parole, and that is consecutive. Count 11.
You were just listening to the judge deliver sentencing for the gunman in the Boulder King Soopers trial, delivering the first guilty verdicts and sentencing for life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 10 of 55 counts there.
Those 10 first-degree murder charges, you heard the judge speaking to each count and then saying the victim's first name. And those counts were ordered in the order that they were killed on that day. 10 life sentences without the possibility of parole, all consecutive sentences, most likely sending a message here. The judge you can feel the emotion almost as those sentences were read.
Absolutely. The judge had a lot to say about this trial, about the attorneys and the impact on the community. Of course, it's been more than 3 years now that the families of the victims and the community has been waiting for justice. It took the jury just less than 6 hours, though, over a 2-day period to convict the defendant on all 55 felony counts.
Yeah, just after noon today, we were told that verdict was in. That verdict was read guilty on all counts. We've decided not to name the defendant, not to glorify the gunman, and out of respect for those who died on March 22nd, 2021. Those convictions, again, included first-degree murder of 10 people, now sentences to 10 life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole as the judge continues to go through the rest of those 55 counts. And that includes, of course, the Boulder police officer who arrived on scene. 9 individuals just out at the grocery store and one of those police officers who responded on that tragic day. Again, the judge continuing to read into those attempted murder counts, 38 others, a total of 55. Of course, this shooter is going to now spend life in prison without the possibility of parole. That was just for one person. the judge having to do the due diligence of going through all 55 now.
Absolutely. We're going to now go to Denver 7's Danielle Kreuter, who's been following today's verdict outside of the courthouse in Boulder. Danielle, these jurors rejected the defense's claim that the shooter was insane at the time of the shooting.
That's right. Defense attorneys actually never disputed that the shooter, in fact, murdered people that day, instead claiming that his severe untreated schizophrenia is what caused him to carry out the attack. The jury sending a strong message with their rejection of that claim, guilty on all counts. Compelling moments happened in trial as experts showed a timeline of the shooter's purchases months before the shooting even took place. Guns, ammo, even at times doing web searches for the most dangerous types of ammunition. Mental health experts also testified that even in the moments after the shooting, the shooter did not appear to be in the throes of a mental break. The verdict giving families of victims a moment of justice that they have been waiting for years.
I had to make calls confirming the worst case scenario to my family. My daughter, your sister, your auntie, your granddaughter, your niece, your cousin was one of 10 lives lost in the Boulder massacre. She was murdered. She is gone. We will never see her again, never hug her, never laugh with her, never nothing. There are no words for a loss of a child or any loved one in this manner.
All right, jury verdict, count number 1.
We also heard from the shooter's family during the trial. They acknowledged his mental illness, but said they never sought out treatment for him.
When he's sick now, what do we know? What are we gonna say? What is the difference between him and a 2-year-old baby? They're both human. They're both, walk. They're both eat. They're both, when they're hungry, they will say, I'm hungry. But at the same time, they don't think. They don't have the mentality, the capacity over here.
Now, we brought you live as the judge was handing out that sentence. Before, though, for the previous hours, we have been hearing from friends and family members of victims in that shooting, explaining to the judge how that impacted them, how this tragedy impacted them, hoping the judge would take that into consideration for that sentencing. We will have much more on what they had to say later on tonight. For now, reporting live in Boulder, I'm Danielle Kreuter, Denver 7.
All right, Danielle, thank you. Of course, our coverage continues.
Those victim impact statements, absolutely heartbreaking. And Governor Polis, also a Boulder native, responding to today's verdict via statement saying, quote, 3 years ago, our community felt the unbearable pain of losing 10 of our fellow Coloradans in a senseless attack on the Boulder community. That day, loved ones, friends, and neighbors were taken from us far too soon by an act of pure evil. Today, justice is served. Though I know this guilty verdict won't heal the pain so many of us feel or bring back those who were killed, I hope that it can provide some peace.
He goes on to say, my thoughts are with the family members and friends of Eric Talley, Ricky Olds, Terry Leiker, Denny Stong, Suzanne Fountain, Trelona Bartkowiak, Nevin Stanisic, Lynn Murray, Jody Waters, and Kevin Mahoney, as well as the entire Boulder community. We are all still Boulder strong, end quote. Now, of course, we're going in depth tonight on that verdict because there's a lot to break down.
And a lot of questions. So joining us now on set this evening is Denver-based attorney Kurt Zahner. Kurt, thank you so much for joining us this evening, especially with such a difficult subject to talk about.
So I want to start earlier in the day because the jury got the case late Friday afternoon. Then they deliberated for a few hours, came back today, another 3 hours or so. In total, only about 6. What do you think, what does that say to you?
I think it says one of two things. When a jury gets a case on the end of the day on Friday, you don't really always see them coming back on Monday. They've been there for weeks. They want to go home. And so usually you see folks, if they've made up their mind already, you get a verdict that Friday afternoon. So there may have been some people in there who just wanted to go a little more thoroughly through the evidence. The other thing to think about, though, is that, the most tragic of cases. And so I think these jurors probably wanted to give the victims, the thoroughness that they deserved. And so not doing it in 3 hours and having it look rushed to the public may have meant something to them. So to come back and dot the I's and cross the T's on Monday, I think maybe made a big deal to them.
And difficult evidence to continue to go over, testimony to continue to go over. I know a lot of people are wondering what happens next. He was claiming he was insane at this time. Can he appeal this?
He can absolutely appeal it. In Colorado, there's no disincentive to file an appeal. There's no added sentence if he doesn't appeal and he loses. And so his legal experts will be looking at the entire trial and every decision by the judge, her allowing the experts in, the testimony that was allowed in, the testimony that was not allowed in, that can all be challenged on an appeal. And that could take years, unfortunately.
And not necessarily saying the decision was wrong, but just the status or the operation of court potentially was wrong.
That's correct. They usually don't appeal the verdict. It's whether the judge got the balls and strikes called the right way, letting in the evidence or precluding the evidence.
Now, we just heard earlier on at 5 o'clock, just as we joined you, that sentence come down. Why 10 consecutive life sentences? He's going to die in prison regardless. Why do you believe the judge sentenced him that way?
I think two reasons. And first, to explain, so consecutive means each sentence, each life sentence runs one after another, as opposed to concurrently, or they all run at the same time. I think there's two reasons for this. Number one, I think it gives value to each of the 10 victims' lives by the judge, right? Every one matters. We're not going to have one life sentence. There were 10 lives taken, 10 consecutive sentences. And the other thing, I do think it sends a message. I mean, I think Colorado is just sick of having these mass shootings. And to really lay it out there for the public when the judge says they run consecutively, he's sending a message to the public and to potential assailants out there that this is the most grave of crimes and needs to be handled appropriately.
Trying to give those families the justice that they've been looking for.
Absolutely.
Kurt Zahner, we appreciate you so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Now, of course, our Denver 7 digital team is continuing our coverage of the Boulder King Soopers trial verdict and now sentence on our website. Also check back in with our team up at the courthouse with more reaction that's coming up a little bit later in the show.